My name is Heather, and I'm 24 years old. I work in an office, the kind of place where people sit at desks and cubicles, typing away on keyboards and clicking through emails as the fluorescent lights hum above. It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills and keeps me occupied during the week. Right now, though, I'm not thinking about work. I'm sitting in a quiet little cafe, nursing a cup of coffee as I wait for Tim. We've been seeing each other for 3 months now, which isn't that long in the grand scheme of things, but it feels like a big step for me. To be honest, this is my first time dating a guy. I never thought much about relationships growing up. Back in my small rural town, there weren't a lot of people around, and I was always focused on other things. School, mainly. My dad made sure of that. He was strict, more so than most of the parents I knew. His philosophy was that education came first, and everything else was a distraction. While other kids went to parties or hung out at the mall, I was at home, studying in my room under his watchful eye. Our house was surrounded by farmland, acres of cornfields and open sky, the kind of place where you can see for miles in every direction but still feel like you're in the middle of nowhere. It was quiet, almost unnervingly so at times. The only sounds were the wind rustling through the crops, the occasional moo from a distant cow, and at night, the cries of raccoons rummaging through the trash cans. I used to joke that there might be more raccoons than people in our town, and honestly, that wasn't far from the truth. Growing up in that environment, I learned to keep to myself. There wasn't much in the way of excitement or socializing, and my dad made sure I stayed on the straight and narrow. He had big plans for me, and they didn't include anything that might distract from my education. I spent most of my high school years buried in books, working toward the future he envisioned for me. A future that, in his mind, involved getting into a good college, landing a respectable job, and building a life that mirrored the stability and predictability of the one we had at home. But as I got older, I started to question that path. I wanted more than the small-town life he had mapped out for me. I wanted to see the world beyond the endless fields and dirt roads. I wanted to make my own choices. My dad didn't see it that way, though. He saw my desire for independence as rebellion, and we clashed more and more as I inched closer to adulthood. The breaking point came about 6 months ago. We had one of our usual arguments, but this time it escalated. I told him I was 24 years old and that I should be able to make my own decisions. He disagreed, saying I wasn't ready, that I didn't understand how the world worked yet, and that if I didn't want to follow his rules, I could leave. So, I did. I packed up my things, left the house, and moved to the city. It was a huge adjustment. The city was nothing like the quiet, predictable life I had known. I remember the first time I stood on a busy street corner, watching the cars whiz by, the people hurrying along the sidewalks, heads down, earbuds in. It was overwhelming, the noise, the pace, the sheer number of people. I'd never seen so many buildings, so much movement, all in one place. I felt like a fish out of water, unsure of where to go or how to fit in. But I was determined to make it work. I found an apartment, got a job in an office downtown, and slowly started to carve out a life for myself. That's where Tim comes in. A few months after I moved, a friend invited me to a group hangout at a bar. I didn't know most of the people there, but I figured it would be a good chance to meet new faces and get out of my shell. That's when I met him. Tim. He was sitting at the end of the table, sipping on a beer, chatting with some of the others. I'm not sure what drew me to him at first. Maybe it was his easygoing demeanor or the way he smiled when he laughed. He had this relaxed confidence that I found both intriguing and intimidating. I didn't expect anything to come of it. I was just there to make friends, maybe have a drink or two and head home. But as the night went on, Tim and I started talking more, and before I knew it, we were the last ones left at the table. We didn't talk about anything too deep, just the usual getting to know you stuff. Where we were from, what we did for work, how we ended up in the city. But there was something about him that felt different. He wasn't like the other people I had met since moving here. He was genuine, easy to talk to, and there was this sense of comfort in being around him that I hadn't felt in a long time. We exchanged numbers at the end of the night, and a few days later, he texted me, asking if I wanted to grab dinner. That was 3 months ago, and we've been seeing each other ever since. It's been a whirlwind, to say the least. Dating is new territory for me. I'm still figuring out how to navigate all the emotions that come with it: excitement, nervousness, uncertainty. Sometimes I feel like I'm making it up as I go along, trying to balance my own feelings with the expectations of this new relationship. It's strange, dating a guy for the first time. Growing up, I never really thought about romance, and when I did, it was more of an abstract idea than something I actually pursued. My dad's rules didn't leave much room for personal exploration, and I was too focused on school to pay much attention to anything else. Now, being in the city, away from the watchful eye of my father, I've had time to think about what I want, who I am outside of the rigid structure I grew up in. Tim has been patient with me, which I appreciate more than he probably realizes. I don't have much experience with relationships, and sometimes I feel like I'm stumbling through it all, trying to figure out what's expected of me and how to navigate the complexities of dating someone. There are moments when I wonder if I'm doing it right, if I'm supposed to feel certain things or act a certain way. But Tim never pressures me. He's understanding, always willing to go at my pace, which makes me feel a little less lost in all of this. Despite my nerves, I'm happy. There's something about being with Tim that feels right, even if I'm still getting used to the idea of being in a relationship. It's a new kind of freedom, one that I didn't have growing up, and I'm learning to embrace it, slowly but surely. As I sit here in the cafe, waiting for him to arrive, I can't help but reflect on how much my life has changed in such a short time. 6 months ago, I was living under my dad's roof, following his rules, feeling trapped in a life that wasn't my own. Now, I'm in the city, living on my own, dating for the first time, and figuring out who I am outside of the expectations that were placed on me. It hasn't been easy. There are days when I miss the simplicity of my old life, the predictability of it all. But then I remember how suffocating it felt, how I longed for something more, and I realized that despite the challenges, this is where I'm meant to be. I'm making my own choices now, carving out a path for myself, and even though it's scary at times, it's also liberating. I think about my dad sometimes, about the fight we had before I left. It was one of the worst arguments we've ever had, and it still stings when I think about it. He was so certain that I wasn't ready to be on my own, that I didn't know enough about the world to make my own decisions. And maybe he was right, in a way. There are still so many things I'm figuring out, so many mistakes I'm bound to make. But I couldn't stay there any longer, living under his control, following his rules. I needed to break free, to find out who I am without him dictating my every move. I wonder if he thinks about me, if he regrets the things he said. We haven't spoken much since I left, just a few terse phone calls here and there, mostly about practical things. Mail that's still being sent to the house, bills I forgot to cancel. There's a distance between us now, a gap that feels wider than the miles between the city and the town where I grew up. Part of me wants to reach out, to try to bridge that gap, but another part of me knows that things will never be the same between us. For now, I'm focusing on the present. I'm taking things one step at a time, trying to figure out this new chapter of my life. And right now, that means waiting for Tim, sipping my coffee, and wondering what the future holds. I don't know where this relationship will go, or how long it will last, but for the first time in a long time, I'm allowing myself to enjoy the uncertainty. Life is unpredictable, and I'm learning to be okay with that. Maybe that's the biggest lesson I've learned since moving too.